Welcome back to the KDPG Sunday Edition. We're talking about recommendations of the Governor and State Auditor General's Task Force on School Violence just released this past week. A key suggestion was for more funding for and better access to mental health counseling. Back with us is Dr. Sarah Daly, Assistant Professor of Criminology, Law, and Society at St. Vincent College. And joining us now is Dr. Anthony Manarino, Director of Allegheny General Hospital Center for Traumatic Stress in Children and Adolescents, Vice Chair of the Department of Psychiatry at AGH and Allegheny Health Network. Thanks, Dr. Manarino, for being here.
Great to be here.
You did see something that you thought was new and worthy of attention in the new task force report?
Yeah, I thought there was one thing that was new, and that was the recommendation to focus in on helping schools become more trauma-informed, which I think just simply means helping teachers and administrators be aware that American youth are exposed to a lot of traumas in their life, and that some of what we may be seeing at the schools could be trauma reactions, including to bullying both at the school and electronic bullying as well.
Has that not always been the case, other than electronic bullying, which is relatively new?
Yeah, it's not really always been the case, because I think it's only been in the last 20 years that there's been increased recognition in regard to the amount of trauma that kids face in American life. And so I think there's more recognition of that than ever before.
So, okay, so with that finding, then the action would be something along the lines of what Dr. Daly is talking about, greater training for teachers in recognition of potential issues that need to be addressed by a mental health expert.
Exactly. Yeah, teachers recognizing that some of the reactions that they see in their students that they may think is just a discipline problem or a behavioral problem could be partly trauma related in these kids' lives. And also educating youth about the impact of trauma so that they recognize and understand that part of what they're dealing with are their own trauma reactions.
And are we talking about both pre and post-incident trauma? Trauma that could prompt an incident and trauma that could be the result of an incident?
Well, absolutely both. Yeah. You know, in regard to some of these major incidents that have happened, that youth who have been affected often have had other traumas in their life predating the incident.
There was an issue in Parkland, Florida, with the suspect in the shooting last February being reported to the FBI on at least 2 occasions. People had concerns about this young man. The FBI got the tips, followed him to a certain degree, and then let him go. That has to be absolutely infuriating if you have a connection to the tragedy at that school. Even in cases where infrastructure has been established, here's where to go. You see something, say something, here's where to go. How can we explain the fact that even when people are identifying correctly in this case someone who is a danger to the community, the people in charge, the government, let those students and those families down?
I think one of the things that we need to focus on is threat assessment, and we need more research about how to accurately understand which threats are credible and which ones will be carried out. Unfortunately, with every horrific attack, we learn a little bit more. That's not saying we want more so that we can learn more, but we need to do better and we need to improve our systems and use this information to start talking about policies like extreme risk protection orders and improve what we know.
So once you know, or think you know, that a student is a threat, what can you do within the law and within the preservation of that person's civil liberties?
So currently in some states, you have the opportunity to report a certain person to law enforcement, and they can petition a court to temporarily remove a person's weapons because they may be a threat to themselves or others. Clearly, we'd like to see this across other states because I think this is a good balance between protecting people's civil rights and their Second Amendment rights and keeping people safe. It's not permanent, but it's a temporary measure to protect themselves.
Do some Second Amendment advocates resist that?
I think this is more well received than the standard like liberal call for taking everyone's guns. So I think that this is a good compromise.
Dr. Manarino, I'm curious what your take is. Do you support the idea of an armed school resource officer in every school, or at least one? Some schools are having more than one.
Right, and I know there's a lot of movement in that regard to have armed officers or personnel in the school system. And I think it can give students and faculty and administrators at the school a greater sense of psychological safety. So there's somebody there who can protect me just in case some other student or outside individual may have a gun in the building. On the other hand, the concern about additional guns in the school is simply that there could be accidents or misfirings and that kind of thing, and could we have increased problems. But I have talked to students who have said, I feel safer at my school now knowing that there might be an armed officer, but I don't think there's actually any data or studies at this point that support that having an armed officer actually reduces violence.
So there's a difference between feeling safer and being safer.
Yeah, exactly. But I would add, feeling safer is not irrelevant, right? Because you're going to learn more easily and be able to pay attention in the classroom a little more easily when you're focused on learning and not focused on, am I safe in my school?
Why is there somehow this suggestion that firearms in the hands of trained school resource officers, that's a very dangerous situation, some would tell you, in a school, but we don't blanch at security at a Steeler game? Of course you want armed personnel there. You don't question the armed protection for dignitaries. Why are we questioning the responsibility, the expertise, the training of a school resource officer, a trained law enforcement officer, just because it's a school setting as opposed to Heinz Field?
So I think one of the issues is that we have to define school resource officer. In some districts, it is a law enforcement officer who is assigned to a specific school. In other scenarios, school resource officers can be a person who is not related to law enforcement and just hired as a school security guard, essentially, with the title of school resource officer. So I think we need to be specific first and foremost about who it is that we're letting into schools with weapons.
And once we are specific, what do we do?
Once we are specific, I think the main thing that we need to focus on is creating positive relationships between students and school resource officers. Research has shown that positive relationships actually make kids feel safer. It's not necessarily the guns or the weapons, but rather the friendship or the kinship between the officers and the students.
So clearly that seems to preclude the idea of arming teachers.
Right.
Do you agree with that?
I do agree with that.
Make sure we're all on the same page
I'm on
here.
that page.
What do you think about metal detectors outside every school? If some schools have them, why shouldn't all schools have them?
Well, I think it's the same concept that, you know, on the one hand, you may get a sense of safety because weapons, guns, knives perhaps can't get through that security. But on the other hand, I also think it gives students the sense that, boy, I'm now in an environment that's dangerous and we have to have security, and does that mean I'm generally not safe here? And I think there's this really, and we face the same kind of issues, for example, in the mental health environment. Should we have metal detectors to prevent incidents like what happened at Western Psych a few years ago? And the worry is are we creating an environment where people think it's not safe? Or are we stigmatizing mental health patients, or are we stigmatizing students?
It was a Pitt police officer who stopped that incident, was it not?
Yes.
Armed, trained officer.
Yes.
Right place, right time,
yes.
Right training.
Absolutely.
Feeling safe. Are we not more safe than we were a generation ago from violence?
We saw a crime peak in the 90s, and since then, overall, violence on a national level has been decreasing, but we've seen pockets of increased violence in certain cities, and we've seen an increase in mass shootings. So I think it's time now to focus on a different kind of violence. There are still certain violence in urban areas that we need to consider, but mass shootings are something that we need to address as a society.
I know this has been a theme that we've all hit several times here. Dr. Maroney, why are there more mass shootings?
Got about 30 seconds. I
Yeah,
apologize.
well, you know, I would certainly say that the accessibility to guns, which kill people, make a huge difference. You know, out in Franklin Regional High School in Murraysville 4 years ago, 22 people were stabbed, but fortunately no one died because there was no gun used, or just knives. So I would say, I mean, I'm very concerned about people having access to guns and increasing the probability that people can die when there is some kind of mass incident.
Thank you both very much. We are right out of time. We'll be back with some final thoughts in just a moment.